Okay, Walter, so please say your name and contact information and
Walter Freeman, Department of Molecular and Cell Biology, University of California in Berkeley.
great. So Walter, would you tell us about your formal education and training?
Well, I started after high school in the U.S. Navy as a U.S. Naval Reserve as a radar technician. Came back, spent 2 years at MIT in undergraduate engineering, and then switched out because I realized that MIT is a trade school, it's not a university. I needed a decent education. So I went to the University of Chicago on recommendation of the dean at MIT, who told me that's where all the other misfits go. I had basically another 2 years undergraduate education, but just
Hi, Ishel.
Hi. Sorry
And
to
so
interrupt.
we're in luck. We get to meet Ishel Chavez. Ishel, wave at the camera.
Oh, hi. Sorry.
Lotfi's faithful assistant, showing us a lot of hospitality
I
today.
apologize for interrupting.
No, not at all. But you're.
Hey, my earring fell off. So there's some sugar here in case you guys wanted some with your lattes.
okay.
Thank you so much.
So you will go home?
Yes, I will go there. Is there anything else you needed?
No, we're delighted that you deserve to be documented as part of this history.
Oh, no.
Yes,
That's
you
fine.
do. Yes, you do.
Okay, have a
Michelle's
good
very
day.
famous for her.
No, thank you.
Are these all the same, and you can?
Yeah, they're all the same.
Yeah, I don't think we did something.
That's sugar, in case anybody wanted sugar.
Okay. No, I'm not going to get it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lotfi.
I did it.
So you were saying you went to the University of Chicago after MIT.
Majoring in English and philosophy.
Oh, great.
And I realized that there's no way I can make a living, a decent living with this.
Apologize, I forgot to leave you the key. So that you can lock when you're finished.
Yeah.
You're on your way out. It is this way.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank
Okay,
you,
sorry.
Ishel.
Have a good day.
No, I switched my major to go to medical school. And at that point, I didn't have enough credits in any one field to get a degree, so I went to medical school without one. And 4 years later, graduated from Yale University with honors, and took a year of internship at Johns Hopkins Hospital,
What year was that?
1954-5.
You just answered my next question. What was your first job in engineering or science? So your internship at Johns Hopkins would have been.
Technically speaking, those, it's unpaid. That is to say, we worked solely for food and board with no income to speak of.
So when was the first time you got somebody to pay you to do science?
Well, after my year of internship, I applied for a postdoctoral fellowship from the National Institute of Health, the U.S. Public Health Service. And that really was my first, let's say, income, other than from my father, who was very interested in furthering my medical education, because I am the fourth generation in medicine, American medicine. So that then led, after 3 years of postdoctoral fellowship, to my first full-time job here at Berkeley in 1959, working now as an assistant professor, working my way up the academic ladder. So that's the extent of my formal education.
Well, we have a lot in common, following in the father's footsteps, being named after the father, also initially considering a career in philosophy and deciding we wanted to make more money than that. All those things that happened to me too.
One correction, it wasn't a matter of making more money, but because I didn't expect to make any money as an academician. but rather that I wanted to work with my hands and not just with my brain.
Great. Would you nudge the trackpad there? Yeah, just nudge it. Don't tap it, but just nudge it.
This one?
Or just hit a key. Hit a key would be better. Good. It's still recording. It just, I want to make sure the computer does it.
Okay.
Okay. So, and when and where was your first paper published? And do you remember the title?
Yes, it was temperature regulation in mammals. It was published in the American Journal of Physiology, 1959.
Oh, great. And what about your first computational intelligence related paper? Where and when was that published and what was
It's also 1959. It was a mapping of the dipole field of the olfactory cortex in cats so that I could demonstrate the source of the signal that was coming from the olfactory cortex. Then I wrote a series of papers in the Journal of Neurophysiology and in Experimental Neurology, detailing the patterns of electrical activity that I could extract by recording impulse responses. I was using electrical stimulation as a Dirac delta function and was determining the linear range of the dynamics so that by superposition I could find the proper range for a small signal near linear approximation. And that was led in 1972 to the beginnings of my first book, published in 75, Mass Action in the Nervous System, which is 500 pages of linear equations, much of which I learned from the engineers here in Corey Hall, who were kind enough, generous enough to allow me to sit in on their courses and develop a facility for solving linear differential equations with Laplace transform. One of the key people was Otto J.M. Smith, for whom I'm eternally grateful for his willingness to take the time to instruct me.
So you couldn't run away from engineering forever.
I came back to it once I'd been educated.
Good, good, good. That's great. So that actually is related to my next question. So I guess your interest in this field is what persuaded you to study the engineering part of it, and what persuaded you to study the science in general?
Oh, this was a reaction, I think, to my realization in my medical experience that I was really an excellent doctor, a good diagnostician, and fully capable of bringing people back from death's door under the right circumstances. But what really fascinated me were the diseases that nobody knew what to do, that had to be researched. And I came into the engineering field from my experience in the Navy with control system, feedback control. I wanted to apply this notion to do the bioengineering of homeostasis, of the regulation of the internal milieu by feedback control.
Wow. Wow. So great. Well, is there a person or event in particular that influenced this this direction to get more involved in research in general and in science?
Several people. One of them was Norbert Wiener. I had him as a teacher of freshman calculus at MIT, and he was a terrible teacher at that level. That's not his forte. He was magnificent as a mentor, In fact, at that time, I had come back from the war in the Pacific, feeling grateful for the development of the atomic bomb, which saved innumerable lives, probably including my own, and was gung-ho to go into physics. Norbert
You hit a key again, just saying.
Norbert persuaded me otherwise. He said if I go into physics, I would wind up building bombs, and there's better ways of spending my life than that. And this was instrumental in my leaving MIT and going into philosophy. And there I was very much influenced by the head of the Department of Philosophy, Richard McKeon, an Aristotelian, who essentially turned me on to analytic thinking, which I found is enormously helpful in designing experiments and choosing what to do and what not to do.
I think you sent me a draft of a paper with some of your inspiration from Aristotle included in it about a year ago. Yeah, that's great. Well, when did you get involved in one of the core technologies? Well, I guess it was when you were doing the modeling of olfaction, right? The core technology of neural nets. So
this was, let's say, in the late 1980s, when I had already done a great deal of work on application of feedback control theory, particularly linear systems analysis, which really constitutes a form of neural network. It's very different from the usual variety based on Boolean algebra and on discrete quantities. I was working with continuous variables and with truly dynamical systems involving measurements of rate constants and using the root locus method to deduce synaptic strength of interaction from the characteristic frequencies that I was able to measure. In other words, looking at a feedback system, you can't take it apart and measure the gain of the individual components in order to get the closed loop gain. What you have to do is to measure the closed loop rate constants, build a model, and deduce the interactions by evaluation, fitting your curves to the data. And this caught the eye of the organizer, particularly Steve Grossberg, of the Neural Networks Conference. And I was delighted to find some engineers that were even halfway interested in following what I was doing. So I felt in good company. Eventually, by 1994, I became president of the INNS.
well, I guess that addresses what was going to be my next question about what triggered your jump into the computational intelligence technology. So it was this convergence of interests and people and where the field was going just seemed like it was a perfect fit for where you were going. I'm wondering, what was your first computational intelligence related activity? Was it one of these conferences?
That's hard to answer because I felt I've been doing, let's say, cognitive modeling right from the start.
Sure, back in '59.
Yeah, so to say that there's any particular point at which I crossed the line, there wasn't any line. I was in it right from the beginning.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, when I heard of your work, which would have been soon after I got into the field in the '80s, it was the olfactory work that I was hearing about. So it was straight from the beginning.
The olfactory system turned out by stroke of luck to be the best place to start. I didn't see this initially. I was telling Don earlier that I got into the neurophysiology with the intention of studying feedback control of the autonomic nervous system arising from my thesis, which was on temperature regulation, which is a control system. And I was interested in finding the sensor in the brain which measures the brain temperature as a critical variable to control, because there's a very narrow range of temperature that brains are effectively functioning well. Outside that range, their deterioration, their brain capability deteriorates. And so I was looking for the sensor by searching for activity in response to raising the global temperature with radiothermia, that is to say radio frequency, or using the Peltier effect to cool. So the problem was that I was using a recording of the brain waves as a way of making a search for this activity of this nucleus. Wasn't working, and as I described to you, I heated up to the point where I killed the whole thing and the activity was unchanged. And that led me to realize that this activity wasn't coming from the interior of the brain, it was coming from the cortex, the dipole field. We measured the activity outside on the scalp. I was measuring it on the inside. So that I had to use a tetrode of electrodes to locate the gradient for these fields to determine where it's coming from. And I identified the olfactory system. And that was a stroke of luck, because the olfactory system really is my entry into cognition. Olfaction is the oldest sense, and it has the solution to the most critical problem, which is generalization over categories of input and abstraction to just the essential features of the category, throwing away great amounts of information. That was the basis then for all the work that I've done since in the other senses, primarily because all the other senses, vision, touch, hearing, taste, all were derived from olfaction.
Well, another advantage is that so many animals are olfactory geniuses. And so when you think about that, if you wanted to look at some things that we do well, a lot of them you start getting into maybe a small group of animals that really do some of these functions really well. But when it comes to olfaction, there are so many animals that are really great at that job.
That's how they make their living. We don't make our living with olfaction.
Right.
For us, we can read the label on a package in the grocery store.
Right.
But animals have a much greater dependence on olfaction. And if they don't have this remarkable acuity, they don't last.
Well, what was the major challenge that faced you in your pioneering research?
Making sense of EEG. It's the most enigmatic, complex, and frustrating pattern of activity anywhere in the brain and the body.
Okay. And the field still sometimes struggles with that.
Oh, it will. In fact, what I did was to use my recording techniques to make charts of activity, and I posted them on the wall of my room. And I had a pretty good sized study, but I had to plaster this stuff all over the walls. And this has turned out to be my real forte, is to gestalt all this data, to mull it over, to let it simmer inside my brain, stuffing in more and more of it, and then getting these sudden flashes of insight. Aha, that's what it must be.
I think that's where your philosophy training maybe gave you an advantage.
I think it certainly did. Of course, 90% of these flashes of insight turn out to be dead end. They don't go, but that 10% makes an enormous difference.
Well, what contribution gives you the greatest satisfaction?
Well, say I think that it's the key steps forward in the development of differential equations which describe certain key operations in the brain. One of these is the description of the operation at the trigger zones of neurons where the conversion takes place between the dendritic currents densities and the pulse density of the axon coming out. This turns out to be a sigmoid curve.
Mhm.
In fact, I didn't call it that. I called it a bilateral saturation.
Mhm.
But essentially, it has a key feature in it. There's asymmetry. And that has been rather sadly overlooked.
Why is the asymmetry so important?
Because that's what makes it possible for the cortex to change state from a low density, sparse coding level of function, which is where most people are working, to a high density, which represents the very intense interaction among the large masses of neurons. And I've realized now that that transition is a phase transition. It's going from a gas-like state to a liquid-like state.
And why is the asymmetry necessary for that to happen?
Because it gives an input-dependent increase in gain. Gain is input-dependent. That when the dendritic amplitudes rise, you not only have an increase in pulse density, you have an increase in the gain.
Mhm.
And that now leads to crossing over a barrier, which I've described as, in terms of linear analysis, as the imaginary axis.
Mhm.
That the characteristic frequency of operation in the low density state is an impulse response which has an exponential decay.
Mhm.
The characteristic frequency in this high density is an exponential increase. It changes sign. And as a
Yeah, so
result,
past an inflection point, you're driving to saturation, and below that inflection point, you're just decaying off. Things happen, but they die off.
it just always constantly dying back. But in this case, man, it blows up.
Yeah, that's great.
So this gives you the transition. Now there's another aspect of this. All the neurons have an upper limit of firing. They
Mhm.
can't have a refractory period, which is that's an absolute restraint on their activity.
Mhm.
But what can happen is an increase in the density
Mhm.
and the numbers of neurons. And the density becomes so great now that the interactions are not just of the synaptic transmission, but they're also Coulomb forces and van der Waals forces,
Mhm.
which essentially operate over very short distances, but they can do so because of the incredible packing density of the axons and dendrites and cortex.
Mhm.
So this means now that with the thinking of a thought, you have this formation of a shimmering film over the cortex, which is interactive at an exceedingly high density. And that's what makes the difference in what we have as a way of an experience, an awareness, a feeling, a richness of the memory which comes out with a particular stimulus. So you look at a picture, look at that, and it's just, okay, it's the feeling of the coffee that goes with it.
Mhm.
That is what is provided by this high density.
Great. Well, now my next set of questions are about the involvement with the Computational Intelligence Society, the International Neural Network Society, the Neural Network Council. So basically that IEEE INNS collaboration, these types of things, which of course have been going on since the 80s until now. So what do you think that?
Intermittently, I might say.
Yeah, but basically it's been strong for the last dozen years or longer. So what do you think the impact that these organizations have made on you?
Given me a strong aversion to any form of administrative work.
Well, what impact do you think that you've made on these communities?
Well, I think I rescued the INNS from virtually going broke because of some irregularities in the operation of the staff that was running the outfit.
Right, we changed management companies under your leadership.
It was, let's say, a crisis of epic proportions. At one point, John Taylor, who was my successor, my president-elect, wanted to run a little article in the newsletter saying how great it was that we managed to save the organization. I had to head him off because we had just lost $750,000 of funds in our organization that that people have gotten aware of that and been fully aware of it, and they've been held in place.
Well, it was we fired a management company, and the next one we got was much better, and then in about 05 we got in about 04 we got another one, and that's been the best one so far.
Yeah,
But,
no, in fact, the guy that took over turned out to be, he was marvelous for about 3 to 4 years, but then he lost interest. And that was why, we got to see, failings here and there. That was when you took over.
right. When I was chairing the annual meeting, we were having the conversations about considering a transition, and 1 year later, we actually did the transition, and that was the year before I became president. So it was when Jose was president, when Jose Principe was president, was when we actually made the switch.
Yeah.
And it was when Michael Haselmo was president that we were getting the bids. But I was part of all that. But yeah, so you had to go through all that stuff long before we did, under much milder circumstances. You were doing under great.
It was duressful.
Right, great duress.
But there's also another contribution I was rather proud of, and that is I got through an amendment for term limits.
You got through several very important changes in our bylaws. The term limits was valuable, and I think that it was a little bit controversial, but I think everybody's happy with it now, including the people that got term limited by that.
Eliminated, yeah.
Right, but you also were the person that came up with the idea of having a college of fellows, and you were the first senior fellow.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very honored that you chose to pass the torch to me. So that was.
I was delighted to have you come along.
Well,
I'd done enough at that point.
Well, there's a few people that are very hard to say no to, and you're one of them. When somebody had served at that level with that capacity, and then they ask you to pick up the task.
I was very grateful. There's also another accomplishment, that was the voting system, the Hare system of proportional representation, where a person can vote for as few or as many candidates. You can put all your votes into one, so that if you have an action group, then you can get a representative on the board, which doesn't depend on popularity or name recognition.
And that has even happened fairly recently. So I think that the most recent elections that were held last year, I don't know how people voted, but I would guess that looking at the fields that are represented in the successful candidates, I would think that happened again. So that has certainly had an impact. Well, what impact have these societies, Computational Intelligence Society and the International Neural Net Society, what have they made in the fields of engineering and science?
Well, I think they've had a major impact in giving venue or giving opening for people in our field of neural networks to publish and be widely recognized. Beyond that, I don't know enough about what's going on in engineering to be able to provide an answer.
Well, creation of several journals is important. I think that the society has also been prescient You see things now like, well, neural networks were very important to the Human Genome Project, and now everybody's talking about big data and all these things. People were making the contributions for the past quarter century that have turned out to be critical to these fields that are transforming society today, and it would not have happened without these kind of contributions. People who were not sure how these things would be applied were already laying the groundwork for them. So, yeah. The next few questions are about the future of computational intelligence. How do you envision the evolution of computational intelligence technologies? Do you see any expected confluence of them and any potential new entry?
I'm not sure how to answer that one either. It's, I have a strong interest in seeing to the emergence of a much wider application of techniques in the study of brains to improve the information retrieval rate from the scalp recordings. This has now been a languishing field because of the complexity, the difficulties of making use of these large arrays of electrodes. 256 now is commercially available. 512 is on the electrodes on the scalp is forthcoming, but people still haven't caught on to how to use the information or how to process it to get maximum value out of it. But I think that in terms of brain-machine control systems, that this is the way that has to go, not with invasive measures, but with non-invasive scalp techniques.
We need to talk more about that. I'm fascinated by that issue, so we'll certainly talk some more about that. Do you predict any scientific or technological breakthrough involving computational intelligence?
Well, I think you have to increase the breadth of definition for computation. I mean, brains don't compute. They are dynamical systems which we can model with computation, so that once we get the idea of how things actually work, then maybe we can implement that or simulate it with digital techniques. A classic example is people say that, well, the eye performs a Fourier transform. Well, it doesn't. It refracts. But we perform the Fourier transform as a way of modeling that. So I think that once people get that distinction more clearly in mind, that they can recognize that, that as John Neumann put it over half a century ago, that brains don't use mathematics. Whatever their language is, it's not what we explicitly call or conceive as mathematics. And you could say that a hurricane, for example, doesn't compute anything, but it certainly has a lot of control things going on in it that we can then model. So that's where the future lies, is looking more deeply into brain, not imposing a computational model, but rather adapting the computational model to what the brain is actually doing.
Wow, that's I think that's a very good fit for some of the things that Lotfi has been promulgating as well. Well, my last question is, any final comments?
Probably. I'll think about it.
Okay, well, we'll have an opportunity. Maybe we'll ask you both for final comments at the end. So we're going to shift gears here, and I'm going to shift the camera slightly. So just stay where you are, and
Very good.
yeah, I think that's great. Okay, good. Okay. So, Lotfi, thank you very much for hosting this interview.
It's my great pleasure.
And Just in case we split these in two, I'll quickly repeat. I'm Don Lynch from Missouri University of Science and Technology, and we're here at the University of California at Berkeley in Soda Hall to interview. We just finished interviewing interviewing Walter Freeman, and we're going now to interview Lotfi Zadeh, Department of Computer Science. I just said your name and contact information. Would you tell us, Lotfi, a little bit about your formal education?
Well, I was born in the Soviet Union, Republic of Azerbaijan, in the city of Baku. So my parents were not Soviet citizens, they were citizens of Iran. But anyway, so my elementary education was in Baku. My mother language was Russian.
And was that where they gave you that?
Yes.
That was in Baku. They gave you that. What is
The
that
medal
called?
is big. It's called Friendship Medal.
Friendship
It's
Medal.
just a sort of a small version.
That's lovely.
Yes, and so my accent is Russian accent. So anyway, so at some point then, situation in the Soviet Union became difficult. My parents decided to return to Iran, and so when we arrived in Tehran, the capital, they placed me in an American missionary school, Presbyterian missionary school. It's called American College.
How old were you when you came back?
10 years.
10 years old.
I was 10 years old at that time. And so I did not know English. I did not know Persian, so it was a little bit difficult.
Well, I think you got the best of three worlds, because you got that foundation in Russian rigorous thinking,
Yeah.
and then you got the Farsi charm, the Persian charm. And please continue on the education.
Yes. I want to add something because the years that I spent in the Soviet Union had a rather significant influence on my life later on. At that time, the Soviet Union, they worshipped science, technology, scientists. They were the people really who were objects of admiration. That influenced me quite a bit. So that stuck with me for the rest of my life. And so at the age of 6, I already decided I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to be a member of the academic world. So that was an early decision for me. So in any case, so I was placed at this American college where we have a chapel every morning. While I was in the Soviet Union, if you believed in God, then nobody would talk to you. So that was a rather sharp contrast. And so then I spent a year or so at American college, and then a new law was passed under which I had to complete 6 years of Iranian school before going on to a foreign school. So I had to leave the American college and transfer to Iranian school, altogether different culture. If a Christian would show up in the school, they had to wash all the walls. So for me, that was a very striking thing, to move from a society in which people believed unequivocally that something is right, something is wrong, to another one the opposite, and then to still another culture. In any case, so I completed my education there. It didn't take me long, it took me 1 year. I returned to American college. And then I received my degree, which was essentially sort of a high school degree at that college. And then I entered the University of Tehran, where the influence was French. All the textbooks were French. So Russian, then American, and then French.
Don't leave out Persian.
But
And Persian too.
Persian too, yes.
So four
Persian
cultures.
too, yes, sure. Exactly, in Iran, it's very interesting that in Iran what is worshipped is poetry, not science and technology, poetry. If you tell an Iranian that Shakespeare was greatest writer, they would kill you. Because to them, greatest poets, writers are all Iranian. That's the culture. And also another little, let's say, vignette. We have these tea houses when you travel, and the entertainment in those tea houses consists of something reading poetry. That's Iran for them.
Wow,
Reading poetry.
that's great.
So people sit, they listen. Tells you something about the culture. But it is some remarkable culture. It's not a superficial culture. But anyway, so University of Tehran, and that's where I got my degree in electrical engineering. And it was education was very rigorous. Very rigorous when I completed my studies toward the bachelor's degree, but I had I was very pleased with the education that I received. It was very rigorous. And then that was World War II. I received my degree in 1942. In 1942, Iran was occupied by Americans, Russians, and the British. So after I received my bachelor's degree in engineering, there wasn't really much for me to do. You know. So but I became a contractor for the Persian Gulf Command. That was basically a military command. And but I was always interested in science and things of this kind. So I could stay in Iran and become rich, but then I would, what would do? Play cards and drink wine, you know. And perhaps a little bit unfair, but anyway, I could not really do anything that was remotely related to science and technology. So I decided to lead that very comfortable life. And we always had a cook and a maid and this and that. And apply for admission to MIT. So I was admitted, I think largely because at that time there were very few American applicants. And so I came to the United States in 1944, and after spending 2 or 3 months in New York, where I worked for International Electronics Company, that was my only stint in industry, 2 or 3 months, that company. I entered MIT, and from that point on, I was always in the academic world. And I too was influenced by Norbert Wiener, people. It was a very exciting environment, intellectual environment at MIT at that time. So it was profoundly different from the environments that I was exposed to before I came to the United States. So I would say all of them were really positive, but in different ways.
So it was basically your intellectual curiosity that persuaded you to do science and engineering and stuff.
Right.
And
Not making money. That was the last thing. And so it was an exciting period. But then my parents came to the United States in 1946. I received my bachelor's degree from MIT in 1946. A master's degree, I'm sorry, in 1946. So I decided, they settled in New York, so I decided to leave MIT. People at MIT wanted me to stay there. But Gilman in particular, he was a very influential person in my life, Ernest Gilman. He taught circuit theory. I don't know whether you had any
I
contacts
was
with
an
him.
undergraduate, had very little contact with him.
So I left MIT and I came to New York. I was fortunate enough to get a job as an instructor at Columbia University. And I frequently sometimes think to myself that if I could not get a job at Columbia University, got a job at City College or Cooper Union, today I would be total zero. I was fortunate in that I got a job at the Ivy League University. Engineering was not in good shape at Columbia, but Columbia is perhaps it's still sort of like the University of Chicago in some ways. Well, anyway, so from 1946 on till 1959 when I came to Berkeley, I was at Columbia University, rising through the ranks and reaching the rank of professor in 1956.
So did you get your doctorate there?
Yes, I got my doctorate. My supervisor was John Rubicini. We became close friends. And it was a somewhat, I think, exciting period. We had students like Rudy Coleman was a student. It was, today we have Silicon Valley, but at that time we had Long Island and all kinds of companies working in the field of control and defense. It was not Silicon Valley, it was a different era, but it is in that spirit more or less.
So did I hear you right? Did you say that Coleman was one of the students there?
Yes.
Oh, good. Wow.
And he was not my PhD student, but was a student in my course. And so it was very stimulating. And this was university. So I had close contacts with mathematical statistics and mathematics and university seminars and things of this kind. So I was at Columbia University, and but then it's again a matter of accident, more or less. Was 1949. I was at a conference in San Francisco, and I met John Wheeler, who at that time was at UC Berkeley. I got to know him, and so in 1957, but before 57, began to develop some problems at Columbia with the Electronics Research Laboratory. So John Wheeler was passing through New York. On Sunday, he called me at home. I said, you know what, I heard that you have some problems with electronics research. Would you like to come to Berkeley? You know, had I not met him in 1949, and had he not been passing through New York, I would still be at Columbia University.
I wasn't blaming that worked
It's
out
amazing,
well
you
for
know,
you.
it's amazing how small things can change the course of your life. So I came to Berkeley in 1959, and it was a very different culture, yes. And it was not Ivy League culture. And so it was good for me. There was more pressure. Yeah. I'd come on there, then they would ask you to teach something, and it was what we were to teach. Here I got a memo saying, you are going to teach something. Yes. So, so I was rather enthusiastic about the environment over here. And then in 1963, I was asked to serve as chair of the department. I was not a candidate, but John Wheeler, who at that time was dean, was and my field was systems analysis. So I became chair, and then my first thing was to push computer science. And
Good timing.
yes, was computer science, and at that time, somebody came to Berkeley from the University of Illinois to serve as director of the center, and his ambition was to develop computer science within letters and science, and concentrate, all of Chinese computer science in that department. That started the war between electrical engineering. Yes, it was not computer science, but whatever he wanted to do, war, really bitter war. And so I was an activist chair. I did this, all kinds of things. And so at some point, an idea occurred to me, preemptive move, change the name of the department. So I presented to the faculty, after all, nobody wanted to do it, but I thought that was right. Eventually I persuaded. They wanted to approve it. That's the recommendation we asked, and in 1967, the name was changed. It became EECS.
And you still are, right?
So, yes.
Yes.
At about the time when we were deciding whether or not to ask for change the name, E.T. Ravais, chair of EE at MIT, was visiting Berkeley, and he told me it was a very bad idea. Very bad idea.
I remember this.
And MIT went and did it too.
3 years after we changed our name, MIT changed it.
I remember this very well because
Yes.
I became chair of the department, my department, and we had two departments then, anatomy and physiology.
That's right.
And I was told by the dean to make a shotgun wedding. This was to be a combined department of
That's
physiology and anatomy. So I was following in your footsteps.
Yes, yes, we were very close.
Yeah.
Walter and I were very close. And so, anyway, it was a difficult period, but it was a compromise solution. Computer science department was established in letters and science. It was difficult because there were disagreements over all kinds of things. But eventually that department was absorbed in EECS. So computer science became a division of EECS, and I moved to computer science. I decided to retrain myself. So I moved from systems analysis. But actually I did that in 1968 when my term as chair came to an end.
Well, that's actually technically as well, because of the one of the questions that I have on my list is about when you got involved in one of the CI core technologies, which of course neural nets, fuzzy systems, and evolutionary. And of course, you're the father of fuzzy systems. So, what was the timeline for that?
Yes, well, let me go back a little bit. So when I was at Columbia, I was always interested in thinking machines. One of my first papers, 1950, was called Thinking Machines, a New Field in Electrical Engineering. That was 6 years before AI was born. It was a student publication. It was not really serious. But anyway, so I was convinced that this is really the direction, making machines.
Mhm.
So at the Columbia, I taught courses in finite state systems, information theory, things of this kind. So in any case, so my interest in what today we call computational intelligence goes back many, many years. And in 1954, I wrote a paper called System Theory.
Mhm.
So that was also in that direction, system theory. I think the term system theory was really coined by me. That my first paper on so-called system theory.
Wow, that's a big area.
Yes. And so I was always sort of in that corner. And I was never a hardcore control engineer or something like that.
Well, what triggered you to make that idea to do fuzzy logic, to create
Well, okay. So I was a strong believer in the power of mathematics. to solve any kind of a problem. But then I began to realize that systems analysis is not very effective really when it comes to dealing with problems of the kind that Walter was concerned with. Probably having to do with brain functioning, neuroscience, things of this kind, biological science, and so forth. And then the question was, what is it? Why is it that these techniques that were so successful in dealing with inanimate systems are not so effective in dealing with natural systems? And then it occurred to me the reason is that in that other world, classes do not have sharp-defined boundaries. So when I wanted to define what were adapters, I couldn't do it. Adaptivity is a matter of degree. So I see in one world, everything is a matter of degree. In the other world, nothing is a matter of degree. It's all black and white. Either it's linear or non-linear. Either it's prime or not prime. Either it's electrical or mechanical, whatever. So then, so I was thinking about that, and then finally in 1964, this idea occurred to me. Fuzzy sets talk about classes, unsharp classes, but where we associate a degree of membership or grade of membership. Simple as the fuzzy sets. So I wrote my first paper on fuzzy sets, and it got a very mixed review, very mixed reactions. I submitted my paper to information control. By that time, I already had, I was known. I was chair of the department. I said, if I look at myself, I was member of the editorial board. I knew which side of the bread is butter. The review that I got was very lukewarm, very lukewarm. But because I was a member of the editorial board, they accepted it as a matter of courtesy. Now, let me tell you that somewhat I'm pleased with. That paper has 34,000 citations.
Probably more than that if you haven't looked since yesterday.
The number is correct. The number 65 people, 34, that's a little bit unusual, 34,000. Usually
Okay.
in Europe, to become a full professor, you need at least 50 citations. That's European rule. Well, anyway, but the reaction was very mixed, and many people told me a bunch of nonsense, this, and so forth. But I have a thick skin. That doesn't bother me.
Well, those count as citations too. If they cited to say that to criticize it, that's still a citation.
I can give an hour-long lecture showing all kinds of nasty things that people said about fuzzy sets, fuzzy logic, all kinds of things.
Would you say that was the main challenge that you faced in bringing this innovation forth, the lack of acceptance, or were there even bigger challenges?
Well, it didn't bother me really. It didn't bother me.
Well, what would you say was a source of struggle at that time when you're trying to bring these new ideas into the world? Were they mainly your leadership challenges in the department, or were you, or were there?
Not leadership challenges in the department. But what was in some sense fortunate was that I published this paper at the time when I was a visible quantity, not at the time when I was an assistant professor. If I was assistant professor, I would be lynched.
Can you touch that?
I use the word lynched, and the reason I use the word lynched is because in 1972 I gave a lecture in France, in France. My first lecture in linguistic variables, used words instead of numbers. Rudy Kalman was in the audience, and he, good friends, but he hated fuzzy sets. But anything that's fuzzy, he hated, because he felt that this is treason. You leave mathematics and you embrace things that are imprecise. So he demanded recognition, and he said things there in print in a sanitized form. But what he said was, Professor Zadeh was complete nonsense. if he gave this kind of a talk in the United States, he would be lynched. That is the word that goes upon.
Well, you're in good company. When Igor Stravinsky's Sacre du Printemps was first performed in Paris, it created fistfights in the aisles over people that thought it was trash and the people that thought it was brilliant.
That's right.
So you're in good
You
company.
have that experience, very true. Well, anyway, so from that point on, I stuck to that particular direction. What he says, this, that, but whatever. And I continued. I no longer wrote papers on control and things of this kind. But there's something that sort of pleases me. In 1963, I wrote a paper on stochastic finite state systems in control.
Mhm.
It was presented at the meeting, but never published. I submitted this paper for publication to Information Sciences recently. It was accepted for publication.
Oh,
1963 paper.
Tadrik.
Yes. Well, anyway, so in 1950, I wrote this paper on thinking machines, but also in 1950, I wrote a paper called An Extension of Wheeler's Theory of Projection. I think it's a good paper. I think that if I took that paper and submitted it for publication today, it would be published. I think so. Well, anyway, so but I was involved in all kinds of arguments. People say it's nonsense. Some of them say published to me, and sometimes behind my back they would say this is a bunch of nonsense. And that continues to some degree today. Continues to some degree. But anyway, now to come to computational intelligence. So in 1991, a fact occurred to me. In the United States, we had fuzzy logic, neurocomputing, we had all kinds of things. And there was competition between them. What is right, what's wrong? And I said, you know what? Instead of fighting with each other, let's form a partnership. And I called that this Berkeley self-computing. So that was launched in 1991. This little room here is a BISC room. Well, anyway, so we started BISC, Berkeley self-computing, and 1991. So that was something that brought these disciplines together. Then later in 1990s, Jim Besdek, he introduced the concept of computational intelligence, which is basically the same as self-computing.
Right.
Basically the same as self-computing. But computational intelligence sounds better than self-computing. It has self-computing sort of a little blunt. Computational intelligence is more sexy, I use the word. And furthermore, what happened is computational intelligence got the support of IEEE.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So computational intelligence began to go into orbit.
Right.
And so today it is in orbit. And the relationship between computer and software is a good relationship. I don't think there is any fighting competition between the two. And so I'm very pleased that there is computational intelligence, because fuzzy logic in the United States has never really been welcome, even though they patent 33,000 patents. Nevertheless, to some degree, it's sort of it's not welcome, let's put it this way. Not many courses are taught on fuzzy logic in the United States. In Europe, yes, but not in the United States.
Well, we do at Missouri University of Science and Technology teach quite a few, as you know.
Quite because fuzzy is not a good word, really. Fuzzy is used in a pejorative sense. So I talked to Don about it, that I think that what should be done really is to have courses in computational intelligence as part of standard curriculum
Yes.
in engineering. And I think a committee was formed to look into that. I don't know.
Right, and that's where a BISC email went out asking people to report on soft computing related courses in
That's
various
what-
universities. I was one of the responders.
So, so here in my department, if I would suggest that somebody be appointment to field of computing, they would not even listen to it. If I said computational intelligence, maybe, you see.
Mhm.
So computational intelligence has not, it's fairly well accepted. So we do not have that many courses on fuzzy logic, but if we had courses in computational intelligence, then fuzzy logic would enter through the back door. It would enter the curriculum by being a part of a course on computational intelligence.
You're absolutely right. For example, in my clustering course, I had Jim Keller and Jim Bezdek talk about fuzzy clustering, 2 lectures.
Now, some people ask me, why is it not used here or so? I said, because people are not familiar with it. When they have a problem and they want to solve it, well, they use the tools that have been taught about the world, you know, at the university or college, whatever. They have never been exposed, so they don't use it. They don't use it. So, but I must also say that this partnership, I think, is very important. So it's not just putting fuzzy logic, neuroscience, neurocomputing, evolution computing, or this other one on the roof. There is synergy. So we have neurofuzzy systems, we have fuzzy genetic systems, neurofuzzy genetic systems, and so forth and so forth. So I think that many problems lend themselves to solution through a partnership of these fields. And that is why exposure to a course in computational intelligence is so important for somebody who is in science and engineering. And,
Well, I think you just anticipated my question number 9, which my question actually number 10, which was what impact has the society made, the computational intelligence society made in engineering and science?
Can I interject a question
Sure.
before you go on to another?
Sure,
one?
yeah.
Because my recollection is that you have had a very strong following in Japan.
yes, yes, yes.
Mhm.
And that, in fact, they have greatly developed the field to an extent that's really unrecognized here. But there's a particular advantage that it had. It was far easier to apply fuzzy logic to practical problems than it has been to apply neural network. In fact, the greater difficulty in neural networks has been the pre-processing, the massaging to get it into a form where it's suitable. Your fuzzy logic has bypassed that. Now, why is it that this has not been a more prominent part in your development? That is to say,
In the
recognizing
United States?
the applicability, yeah.
Yes, well, you know, it is a somewhat complex issue. In part, it has to do with the word fuzzy. That is an important, but that's not the only thing. And also, in part, because there was competition in some sense between AI and fuzzy logic. You know, people are now committed to 200 billion logic. Fuzzy logic was not welcome. Also, you have probability community feels that there is no need for fuzzy logic, and so there are all kinds of political things. Yes, political things and things of this kind. But in Japan in particular, but also in European countries, fuzzy is a good word. Fuzzy, in fact, won a prize as a good word in Japan. Good word. So, what pleases me are some numbers. And that is there are 256,000 papers in the literature with fuzzy intelligence.
And that's probably a lot bigger if you haven't looked since yesterday as well. Well, how do you envision the evolution of computational intelligence technologies? Any expected confluence, any potential new entry? Would that be computing with words that you've talked a lot about, or is there some other new entry or confluence that you expect?
Of course, I'm somewhat biased, but I do feel that, some time ago, I came to the conclusion that it is important to address problems deal with natural languages, not the way linguists do, not those issues. What's the difference between this language and that language? But in terms of being able to compute with information that is presented in natural language. And out of that came computing with words. A book is coming out shortly. Computing with words. So linguistic variables, that was the first step, linguistic variable. And there were all kinds of negative comments. We move from numbers that are respected to words which are not respected. That's a treason for many people. But anyway, so now the reason why there is some advantage to that, which was not recognized, is because words are less precise, but in many cases we don't need high precision.
Right.
Precision is costly. If you reduce precision, you don't have to use expensive sensors and this and that. You can get by with simple things. Simple things. An example is Yamakawa's pendulum, inverted pendulum. To do that using control theory, you need master's degree control. To use Yamakawa's 7 rules and 10 rules, you need nothing. A 10-year-old child can say, well, if the pendulum follows this way, that way, give it a push. 10 rules.
Mm-hmm.
So here you have a situation in which, you can bypass all of that stuff and do that. People park a car, they don't use any computations and so forth.
And another advantage that you get with less precision, the fact that you can use simpler sensors. Also, one thing that connects it back to neural nets is that you can use massive numbers of them. Animals use rich numbers of sensors. They may not be very precise, but they have huge numbers of them.
So I do feel that I have been somewhat of a lonely voice, even within the physiological community, in suggesting that we have to address issues that relate to natural languages. There are many people in the physiological community who don't agree with that, who don't like it, and so forth. And so anyway, but I do feel that it's not, as yet, so far as I can see, something that is influential within computational intelligence. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I don't see that many papers in computational intelligence which relate to that. In the AI magazine, they publish some of my papers. They have a paper called PNL, Precision Natural Language, after a lot of discussion. But they published that paper. And so, because in AI, there is a long standing interest in natural language. There is this interest. In computational intelligence, I don't see that long-standing interest there. Well, anyway, so I do feel that with the passage of time, it will become clear that this is really an important direction. Because many of the things that go into automate today involve natural language understanding. If instead of using a laptop or something, you could enter information using natural language. To some degree, people are moving with that.
Right.
It would be much, much simpler.
Yeah,
You could just talk to your laptop instead of using your fingers.
or your mobile device of whatever kind. Could you hit a key in it?
I think the latest Samsung model has that capability to some degree.
Right. Well, are there any other new entries or new breakthroughs that you think are on the way or on the near horizon?
Well, difficult to tell, but I think that this natural, it's not a new entry, But it's only now that people are becoming more receptive. My book, Computing with Words, I mean, once I have that, it's just that book. It is basically PowerPoint version of a lecture that I did. That's Springer. I think that in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, people will say, you know what, perhaps Zadeh was not so stupid, and people in linguistics and some other things. And logic also, logic, classical logic, fuzzy logic, you accept the linguistic truth values. Very true, people do it all the time, it's very true, not quite true, not in classical logic, but in fuzzy logic, it's okay. So there are certain things which are taboo today. And
Well, maybe being in these 4 different cultures when you were a child and a young man helped you to appreciate the value of breaking taboos sometimes.
find the fact that the different communities they have altogether different views, but it couldn't be that all of them are wrong. See?
Right.
There is something that is, they can take from these communities and put it together, and that broadens your view. So my exposure to some of these different cultures, I think, broadened my outlook, and that's why I don't develop a feeling of hostility toward those who disagree with me.
Well,
okay, everybody has his own views. Fine. If you don't want to eat pork, fine. If you drink wine, fine. If you're this, fine.
Well, our culture is built on the Hegelian dialectic. People are supposed to agree and then come together.
That's right.
Well,
now, I must say that in conclusion that I'm very grateful to this country for making possible for me to come to the United States, to get my education, to the university. Very, very grateful. Very grateful to this great country. Very grateful. I do not always agree with some policies of the government or some foreign policies, but I do deeply, deeply appreciate my being for a U.S. citizen. And also, what is very important for me is this, that when I was a student at this Presbyterian school, I was very deeply impressed by the American missionaries who were teaching, wonderful people, mostly from Midwest, mostly from Midwest. And it is this admiration that actually gave me this, or instilled in me the strong desire to go to the United States, where these wonderful people come from, you see. And so what very important for me is that here in the United States, the level of decency is very high, very high. So in many other countries, you suspect that people are cheating you, this and that, and so you don't trust people. In the United States, it is not the way. I can knock on the door of a neighbor and I say, can you help me? And my neighbor will help me without thinking, what can I get from this man, or if I help, what should I expect in return? And they don't have calculations of that. Wonderful people, like the people that see that around the table here, wonderful people.
Well, we're built on that, right? We're a heterogeneous culture, and we're that's what makes us great, is that we're able to attract people from all. We're all immigrants.
That's right.
Yeah.
However, let me also tell you that I'm not a great believer in having more and more heterogeneity. It's good, like many other things. Up to a certain point, good. But beyond a certain point, it becomes a force for conflict. Conflict. So in countries which you have minorities, you see it now, we have Shiites, we have Sunnis, we have Syria, we have Alawites, we have this and that. Strong conflicts. So I'm afraid that in the United States, this is what's going to happen, not in 5, 10 years from now, where heterogeneity will get to a point where you don't have a dominant majority. You don't have a dominant majority. It's a collection of minorities. which have different cultures, which do not want to assimilate, which do not want to become proficient in English, stick to their own culture. So I'm a little troubled by the fact that that is what may happen in the United States. Perhaps not in the immediate future. Look at Belgium, look at many other countries, conflicts on religious grounds, on ethnic grounds, on various kinds of black, white, whatever.
This is a feature of American education,
Yes.
American high school over the past century or more has been a very powerful force for homogenization. That is, the students who come in want more than anything to become American, to become more American than their parents, certainly. And so that force of cohesion that you're describing was built into the American high school. That's what's weakening now, as you described it.
But you do see one thing, I think, with every generation of immigrants, those first generation immigrants, they want to be able to report that they came to America and made it. And so that causes there to be a certain degree of acceptance of the shared values in the culture. And you see that very powerfully in almost every culture that comes here. They want to be able to report back home to their parents.
True, but beyond a certain point, when from being a small minority become same size as other, then they, I think, will change. In other words, the pressure to assimilate will become weaker. So I'm a strong believer in assimilation.
Yeah.
Assimilation. You came to this country, try to assimilate. Don't stick come to a point where you reject the values of this country.
Of course, that's the whole reason. For
My
coming here.
teacher in
Let's
medical school
would you
was
click that. Let's go ahead and I'm going to ask you a couple of more questions, but they're not going to be on the topic of the interview. So if you just click the tap that like that, yeah. Oh, again, make it turn green. Just pull it down there a little bit. Yeah. Oh no. Yeah, right there. Just tap.
I had a teacher in psychiatry who was born and raised in Russia. And,
Jointly now. Do you have any final remarks about the field of computational intelligence and just now that we've had this conversation, do you have any final remarks just based on what we've been talking about today? Comments on
you first this time. You first this time.
Okay, fine.
sort of summary?
Yes, I do. What I see is some competition between the computation intelligence community and the AI community. I think that the AI community looks down on the computational intelligence community. And it's for a variety of reasons, but anyway, they have the feeling of superiority. So computation is a latecomer. We have been around since '56. Computational intelligence was born in 1996 or something like that. And so there's this tendency. There's a tendency to feel that standards are lower in computation intelligence than in AI. There is this feeling. And I'm not a card-carrying member of the AI community, but I'm close to that community. So I think that what is happening is that with the backing of AAA, the backing of IEEE, I'm sorry, that computational intelligence is growing like that, and AI is growing much more slowly. And AI tends to stick to traditional AI fields of interest. Previous was logic, but now probability has become respectable. But So what is going to happen, I think, that's my prediction, is that computational intelligence as a society will overtake AI. It's happening right now.
Maybe already has
So I
happened.
don't know what the numbers are, but I wouldn't be surprised if the AI community is numerically smaller than the
Probably
I
is.
wouldn't be surprised if the circulation of computational intelligence is greater than the computational AI magazine. So this is what's going to happen. So AI, it seems to me, is not doing that well because it's conservative. Computational intelligence welcomes fuzzy logic. AI never did. They published my papers, but after a lot of discussion and arguments and God knows what. And so I see this is what's going to happen. Computational intelligence also tends to be less parochial,
Yes.
less parochial. So, by virtue of the fact that it is a partnership of three things, that is fundamental.
Mhm.
It is broader.
Mhm.
It's more, I think, receptive to new ideas. There's that. And so I feel much more optimistic about the future of computational intelligence than I do about the future of AI.
Good. And how about you, Walter?
Well, my perception is somewhat different in respect to my acquaintances in engineering who are thinking in terms beyond computational intelligence. In other words, they see artificial intelligence as basically brain dead, and that it hasn't accomplished anything of major importance in the last 20 years. And the computational intelligence has already overtaken that field with great vigor and with considerable importance of new advances in applications. But that there's another field of development which goes by the name of physical intelligence to distinguish it from both computational and artificial and biological. And this is the emergence of physical machines which can simulate the operations of biological brains using hardware. And that is where the future lies, that they are small in numbers of people involved. They have essentially a primitive set of tools with which to work, but that they have a goal to overtake both computational and ultimately biological intelligence with the creation of entirely new kinds of machines.
Mhm.
Now, my picture is that the relations that we have with artificial intelligence are so far distant that there's no real cooperation or integration. With computational intelligence, there's a very powerful link with the biological intelligence, which I think is very fruitful. In fact, I see that the work that I do involving collaboration with people in random graph theory and in quantum field theory, that these are very important new tools to put to work. And most recently, my interest in thermodynamics of brains is an engineering concept which really doesn't come from either computational or artificial intelligence, but which has a high degree of relevance nonetheless, but will need particularly computational intelligence to become a reality. There's the further feature of the development of new materials, which are making possible even further reduction in the size of components into nanotechnology, which has made possible now the development of a chip by DARPA, which has 1 million neurons and 100 million connections, no, I'm wrong on that one, it's 10 billion connections, 10,000 for each element. Now that essentially is a tool that they are looking for advice on how to make it work, what to do
Right.
with it. And that's where the biologists can come in and tell them, that's what I do, to advise them on how to program this device with their equivalent of spice before they actually build it, so that it can do something useful. Now, what it might do useful would be essentially the kind of problem which is what Lotfi you described earlier is one of how is it to build a device that will pick out an object. If you think in terms beyond that, ultimately, in terms of the use of language, natural languages, that is something that even in neurophysiology, we have very little to say about it of any real value. So that's still further into the future, but for the next 20 years, I think this collaboration in the development of physical intelligence will be a very fruitful domain.
Great. Well, thanks for those comments, and I think you're right that that certainly the hardware is going to have its influence as well. In fact, maybe I should come back up here sometime and get Leon Chua's thoughts about hardware.
Memory stores.
Risters, yeah. So, thank you both very much.
Thank you so much.
Lotfi, you've been a wonderful host, and Walter, thank you. And this has been really great. Really great.
Thank
So,
you.
thank you guys very much. Thanks for manning the
Tell me
camera
what
down.
is going to happen to this? Is it going to